So good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you today, and I mean that sincerely. Isn't it great to be able to use the tools that we have to be able to bring different services together in this way? What a brilliant example of our collective commitment to work in a cross-sector, multi-agency way. So just great to see everybody this morning. My name's Jonathan Cordiner, and I'm a Quality Improvement Officer with Education and Children's Services with Aberdeenshire Council. But my job's not just about supporting schools, and I've had opportunities recently to work with multi-agency groups working in relation to child protection. And I'm really fortunate to have had the chance to work on the neglect subgroup. I've only been in post 6 months, folks, so I'm a bit of a latecomer and can't take any credit for the wonderful work of the group. But it does mean that I come in objectively, and I can see the real potential the Neglect Toolkit has to, I guess, first of all, support services in preventing and tackling neglect, but also support us as different services in terms of our joined up working through our multi-agency partnerships. So my job at this moment is to introduce to you the 7-minute briefings part of the toolkit, of which there are 5 of them, one for each of the following services: Education, Police Scotland, NHS Grampian, Children's Services, Social Work, and Adult Services, Social Work. So each service has prepared a 7-minute briefing. However, on account of the fact time is really precious this morning, we're only going to share 2 of them with you. All 5 will be housed within the Neglect Toolkit, which you'll find on the Garfic Aberdeenshire website. But for now, we're going to have the presentations from Police Scotland and one from myself from education point of view. So first of all, we're going to... Okay, thank you for that. Okay, folks, so I'm going to go ahead now and give a 7-minute briefing, 7 minutes or so, from education's point of view, thinking about the Neglect Toolkit and what it means for us in education, and what the potential benefits for us could be. So thinking about the Neglect Toolkit from, I guess, particularly from school's point of view, with my head teacher hat on, I'd like to speak about why that could be really useful. So neglect, we got that definition earlier about it being persistent failure to meet a child's basic physical or psychological needs, and that word persistence, really important, isn't it? But it's challenging. One of the themes that we've heard throughout some of the presentations this morning has been that identifying neglect can be challenging, and identifying whether it's within the domain of well-being or it needs a child protection response. That can be really challenging for us. So often in schools, I think, and I guess in other places, but so often there can be that rumbling concern that something just doesn't feel quite right, that a young person's just not quite looked after as we would like them to be, or more than that they're entitled to be, as per the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So the toolkit, the Neglect Toolkit, provides us a pathway in that situation. I think in those kinds of situations, so often we say, right, we need to monitor that, we need to keep an eye on that, we need to monitor that. What does that actually mean? The Neglect Toolkit really helps us drill down into that, gives us kind of systematic steps to work through in that regard. Because identifying neglect's hard. I believe there's an extent to which when there's an incident or a situation that's firmly within the domain of child protection, there's a straightforward path, isn't there? We're really good at working through a really robust process. We know exactly what to do. And I'm not saying that we're less adept at dealing with neglect, but what I am saying that when it comes to neglect, rather than that child protection incident, it's more subtle, it's less visible, it can be under the radar. It requires a different skill set, and it's a skill set that we as professionals, as practitioners, it requires a skill set that we need, and that's what the toolkit can help us with. Provides us that CLPL, that pathway, the tools, the approaches, resources. It's all there for us. So what is being proposed through the toolkit, when you explore it, there's not an awful lot of things in there that you're going to find brand new. It's here to further support the already good practice that we have. Lots of great practice going on in schools, that we would reference in this regard in relation to tackling inaction and neglect. Huge efforts made in terms of nurturing approaches across schools in the service, significant investments in pupil equity funding and planned and timely interventions involving multi-agency work. And we want to keep building on the great work that we're doing. And the Neglect Toolkit is part of that. It shouldn't be seen as something else. It shouldn't be seen as an add-on. It should be another string to our bow and serves to complement the already great work that's going on in relation to neglect. So for example, then we've got that rumbling concern. We've maybe got a member of staff saying, I'm a wee bit worried about this young person in an ongoing way. Nothing I can put my finger on, but perhaps a feeling that a medical need's not being met or that a nutritional need's not been met. The Neglect Toolkit gives us somewhere to go for guidance resources. So we want to monitor it. So what next? By going to the pathway, by going to the toolkit, it's going to encourage us to do some really robust recording, to build that picture that we need to build up, to look for evidence, to look for historical information, and build up that picture. Fiona in the first presentation today was speaking about the need to get to that more holistic assessment, to build up that picture. And there's tools and resources in there to help us do that. Then we often get to the point where we're making a plan and we're ready to intervene. You're going to hear some interesting presentations coming up with how the toolkit can help us at that point. For example, if a courageous conversation's to be had, you're going to see information on how we can be supported with that. I remember starting as a deputy head in a school. So if you're working in schools and you're thinking about management teams, I'm thinking as a deputy head. I remember being quite suddenly flung into courageous conversations, and that was a big learning curve. As a DHT, I think it would have been really useful to be able to engage with this kind of resource. So I strongly encourage all our leadership teams in schools and across other services who are intervening in this way to engage with this particular part of the toolkit. Another useful bit, which I think could be really helpful for us when we start to work through situations where maybe with parents and carers or families, you're going to hear information shortly about a particular part of the toolkit that deals with coping with resistance, and it really helps us with that. And one of the really important bits of the toolkit, which I really like, is the fact that there's a real emphasis on our human abilities, how one of the most important attributes we have in dealing with fairly complex situations is our ability to be human, to show compassion, and understand that if we're met with resistance in that way, that it can be the tip of the iceberg and something that we need to get underneath. So more on that shortly, but it was part of the toolkit which I was really interested in and thought would be really useful for us from a school's point of view. So in schools, preventing, identifying and actioning where we see neglect, that can be common day, but navigating these situations, again, they require skill sets that we need to have, and we need our staff to have, and we can build these skill sets through engaging with the Neglect Toolkit. So to finish, I'm not sure how many minutes I've used, probably more than my 7, but I thought I would finish by just a couple of key highlights that I thought. You're going to hear something, you're going to get inputs on the case studies shortly, and they are just brilliant. As a head teacher working in schools, I could really relate to these case studies. There were examples of things that we come across all the time, every day, and then examples of how we would use the toolkit to make appropriate assessments using appropriate criteria, how we record and move that on in a systematic way. And I just thought the case studies were great and really helpful. So you can look forward to hearing a wee bit on that shortly. And the other thing I like, folks, about the toolkit is that it's not enormous and it's not overbearing. And I think sometimes when we're introduced to something new, you go through that bit where you think, oh, I can't find my way around this, or there's bits everywhere and it's difficult. It's really succinct. It's really nicely put together. And I really like that about the toolkit. So I hope that you find that to be the same. So from education's point of view, there's just a few ideas and reasons for why I think the Neglect Toolkit could be potentially really helpful and really important for us in terms of supporting young people and families. Okay, folks, I'm gonna carry on with the next presentation. Yeah, I'm really enjoying all the inputs this morning. The fact that they're all so many short inputs, the way that the morning's put together, the variety of presentation and inputs is really interesting. So in this last few presentations that we have for you folks, what we're going to do, what we're doing is we're picking out particular parts of the toolkit and just giving you an overview of it and why we think it might be useful. And the part of the toolkit that I'm going to speak about just for 5 minutes or so just now is in relation to being professionally curious. So this particular part of the toolkit is called professional curiosity. Right, so I've enjoyed learning about this bit as well, actually. So I'm going to give I guess as I go through this 5 minutes, folks, what I'd encourage you to try and do is keep two things in mind. Not just perhaps finding out a little bit about professional curiosity, but secondly, more importantly, perhaps, please keep in mind how this particular part of the toolkit could be useful for yourself or for someone in your team, because that's very much what this morning's all about. So let's go. I like big pictures, and I like big pictures on slides that especially remind me of why I'm in the profession that I'm in. Start with the definition and of professional curious, and I won't read it to you. I'll just let you read that for a moment. Okay, so every single one of these young people, every single child here is precious and in our care every single day, and we are duty bound to give them the very best. And in order to do that, this particular part of the toolkit says if we're going to get it right, if we're going to get the best for them, it's really important that as professionals and people working with young people, that we have a sense of professional curiosity. So what is that? It means always being willing to look deeper, to look below the surface, because everything can look okay on the surface, and maybe too often no news is good news. And our young people, or indeed anybody that we are working with, they deserve more than that. We need to be better than that. We need to be able to see what's not on display. And in order to do that, we need to be professionally curious. It doesn't mean we overanalyze absolutely everything all the time, or overanalyze every child every day, but it does mean we keep an open mind. It does mean we want to look deeper, especially if we see a barrier, or if we see something that doesn't feel quite right. We want to keep an open mind. We want to make no assumptions. Assumptions like maybe, but we've covered that one before, and everything was okay there, so that'll be fine. Or assumptions like, but we know that person, we know that family really well, so that'll be fine. Making sure that we're not making these kinds of assumptions. That the toolkit refers to a respective skepticism, which was a new term for me, and I really like that. Being able to hold a view of relative but healthy skepticism is a skill that we all need. So some of the what did I really glean from this particular part of the toolkit? Some of the top tips, because I've been learning about this, and through engaging with this part of the toolkit, a useful reminder for me is the message that not to take what's given as the truth. So sometimes we diligently record something because that's the right thing to do, and we know that we need to do that. But we've got to be asking ourselves the question all the time: is this definitely an accurate representation of the account, of the event, of what it is that's going on in the background here? Is it? We need to ask ourselves that question, and in order to move forward with that query, we need to triangulate, and that's this part of the toolkit tells us triangulation is it's a key skill if we're going to be professionally curious. Being able to get that information from different places and ensure that it marries up. Playing devil's advocate helps us to keep an open mind. I guess just being always willing to adopt that position where we say, but what if? Do you know what, in relation to that, one interesting piece of advice in here is to think the unthinkable. And sometimes if something passes us by, it can be it can be because it's so inconceivable that we've not taken our minds to that place. And part of my work with the child protection groups, they've been exposed to situations which previously I wouldn't have believed were right on our doorstep. So think the unthinkable is the message there, and listen. Sounds like such a simple one, such an obvious one. Of course we listen when we're going through this process, but I think it's a tough one, and I know I've been guilty of this in the past, where we're so keen to do the right thing. We're working with a situation, we're so keen to make sure that we're recording it properly, and actually what people need us to be sometimes in that situation more than anything is human, and do the things that humans do when we're actively listening to someone. And we all know what these things are. So using professional judgment, common sense, intuition and gut feelings. I love that part. One of my favorite, and I'm actually going to finish with that in a wee minute. I love the notion that one of our most useful tools is just to be human, is something that is actually innately in all of us. I love that. So I'm going to finish with that just in a wee minute. Some of the barriers. What are some of the things that get in the way of us being able to be professionally curious? So disguised compliance. Sometimes when we try to support or help or intervene, whoever it is that we're working with, we might be hearing all the right noises and on the surface seeing all the right things, and that can be displayed by someone because they wish to be perceived as compliant, as cooperating, and underneath that, the intended change or impact or outcome is not happening as planned. Something for us to be mindful of. We can be met with non-engagement, which we've heard a bit there a moment ago. Hard to reach individuals, hostile reactions can stop us from being professionally curious. And loads of advice in this section and in the section on understanding resistance within the toolkit. I thought normalization was an interesting barrier. Just for example, you might have a young person who's living in adverse circumstances, but would never dream of mentioning it because that's all they've ever known. That's normal. So why would they bring that up? Why would they mention that? Being mindful of that's really important. And our own bias, that is a barrier. I guess I would ask you, how judgmental do you think that you are? And we need to ask ourselves that. If your response to that is, well, no, I'm not judgmental, then I'd probably respectfully disagree to an extent, because I think there is an extent to which we all are, maybe not in what we say, but in our minds, there's an extent to which at times we are too quick to form a judgment, to form an opinion, to jump to conclusions based on what we see or what we hear. And the way to counter that is just to be mindful of it, to be mindful of our own bias and our efforts to be non-judgmental. Courageous conversations we mentioned earlier, and that's a skill that we need all our team to have. And that takes time, experience, practice, expertise, and a lot of integrity to have the courage to do the right thing. And that's a really important part for us as well. The last one there, professional deference, and again, perhaps something I'd not given too much thought to before. But this is where something's not actioned on account of a decision made by someone in the team. So let's say, for example, you've brought something to your line manager and they don't see it in the same way you see it. They don't see it as a serious matter, but you do, and you've got the context, you've got the background. So we've got to be brave enough to speak up in that situation. But more than that, folks, there's a professional implication for the leader, for the manager in that situation, because if you're in a position of leadership, the question there is, are you harvesting a culture in your team that endorses that kind of debate, that kind of discussion that allows people to question each other and do that? So my favourite bit to finish, as I say, is that human bit, the advice within this part of the toolkit that refers to using our instinct, using our gut. If it doesn't feel right, then our professional curiosity should allow us and lead us to say that that's worth exploring. The strongest attribute we'll have is being human, and that really chimes with our current focus in education and children's services on Folan's drivers for whole system success. What we are for whole system success, and a key theme within that revolutionary research is the importance of human spirit. He unpacks 4 key drivers or approaches for us to work for system success. And drivers 2 and 4 are social intelligence and altogether systemness. And a key conclusion drawn through these bits are that human intuition is so important. Human spirit knows no limits, is what Fullan says in that regard. And I don't know about you, but that really gets the blood pumping, the notion that in order for us to together make a good job of getting this right, we need to rely heavily on the bits that are human, on our human instinct. Yeah, I think that's really powerful, really important. So I hope that gives a brief insight into being professionally curious. More importantly, I hope your takeaway from that might be how this information or this part of the toolkit could be useful for you and your teams.